Now, to discuss this, we're joined from Brussels by Nweke. He's an African affairs analyst. And from Leiden in the Netherlands, we have Daniel Mekonnen, and he's the executive director of the Eritrean Law Society. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us on the Newsmakers. Now, I want to start by saying that from here, from the outside, this peace deal looks like possibly one of the most amazing peace deals in decades. Flights have resumed, embassies have opened, and communication lines have been established again. Now, is this just a facade, or what really needs to happen in the next 6 to 12 months for this really to work? And I'll put this first to you, Collins.
Well, you've captured the short-term gains of this peace deal pretty well. Another aspect of it, of course, for the everyday man is the fact that families have, reunited. Now, I do not know where the cynicism comes from, but you will note that there are individuals and, of course, countries that actually benefited from, the conflict as it lasted. So if the cynicisms are coming from them, it is well understood. But for the vast majority of the people of Ethiopia and Eritrea, I think this is the best gift of the century that they can have. Okay. Now, the two leaders need to be commended and encouraged from all quarters to, keep up the peace and just keep tinkering on.
Okay. And Daniel, do you agree that this is the best gift of the century?
Everyone would like to have peace. So there is no question about that. It's good that the two governments have finally came to their senses, and they have started a new peace process. But since the beginning of this process, we have been expressing concerns in particular on the side of Eritrea. But now, as we have seen from last month, including the beginning of this month, there are even some worrying signs coming in from Ethiopia. We need to remember that the absence of armed conflict between two countries alone does not come as something of peace. Both countries need to be at peace with themselves in their own internal political processes. And if I give you some recent figures and reports of recent times from Ethiopia, there are very, very worrying signs. Since the new prime minister came to power in April, United Nations agencies are telling us there are close to 1 million people displaced in Ethiopia because of ethnic-based violence. Just last Friday, there has been another incident of ethnic-based violence in Western Ethiopia, in which 40 people has been said killed in the conflict, and more than 70,000 people have also been displaced. Okay. So if you look into these latest developments, they don't come in you cannot reconcile them with the sense of optimism we have observed at the very initial few months, 2 or 3 months since the new prime minister came to power. But if you look into Eritrea, the problem is actually much worse in the sense that there is no sense of responsibility on the part of the Eritrean government in terms of opening up the political space. So what I would like to say here is, it's good that the governments have no peace in their bilateral relations, but they also need to make peace with their own people at home, and then only then can say this new initiative will have a lasting.
Yes. Continue. Sorry to have interrupted you. Can you finish your point, Daniel?
Yeah, exactly. And as far as Eritrea is concerned, we need to remember the government should now come up with a plan on how to implement the long overdue political transformation of the country. Remember, this is a country which is ruled without a constitution, without any form of parliament. In relatively speaking, Ethiopia is much better in some aspects of these issues I'm discussing now. But Eritrea is completely a different case. Let's hope the new process may have its own spillover effect on a gradual basis, which we can only assess and evaluate with time. But as we see it now, things are still, nothing has changed in Eritrea as far as the internal political process is concerned.
But I'm sure, you know, these are very early days, and I want to come back and look at Eritrea in more detail. But I just want to capture, you know, what needs to really happen, because we've seen peace before. Just how fragile is this peace deal? And is it more than just, like you mentioned, you know, good bilateral relations, or do we now need to really institutionalize that goodwill? To you, please, Collins.
Yes. Okay. Yes, indeed, Daniel has captured the preliminary challenges facing this hard-end peace. Of course, everyone will agree, I mean, despite the figures that Daniel gave us, and on the assumption that those figures are correct, that the situation as it is today, no matter how little, is an improvement of the situation as they were yesterday. Now, we can only build on it, and how do we build on, you know, the peace agreement that has, that has been agreed? Number one, there need to be an implementation plan on both sides. And I think it is important that international bodies, more importantly, the African Union, needs to play a very, very important and strategic role in keeping this fragile peace as it is today, starting with the implementation plan that both countries have to put on the table. I think it is important that when that has happened, that a standing mediation team will remain in both countries and indeed ensure that whatever is agreed as the implementation is followed through to conclusion. Now, another very important aspect that I believe should not be ignored is, the arrangement to put back, the countries, especially Eritrea, in the intergovernmental authority on development. I believe that that move needs to be heightened and made to happen as quickly as possible.
What do you mean exactly by that?
What I mean by that is that part of the deal in terms of the agreement reached is the fact that the Eritrea needs to be brought back to the fold of the intergovernmental authority on development.
Okay.
Now, it is an international agreement that has quite far-reaching obligations. And once they sign up to it, and there are very many reasons why they should sign up for it, both for social, economic, and otherwise. And so once they sign up for it, I believe that living up to the expectations of the agreement will also help to contribute to sustaining the peace, the fragile peace that has so far been agreed. Okay.
And Daniel, your thoughts on this point?
Yeah, I agree with some of the observations made by Collins in for example, the need for Eritrea to rejoin IGAD, the Intergovernmental Agency for Development for the whole of Africa countries. More than that, however, I would like to focus on the need to strengthen national institutions. There has to be a move on both sides. At least Ethiopia have started this kind of move. Of course, the Prime Minister have taken very bold measures, including by inviting the most radical armed groups which were in exile, have been invited to Ethiopia. We have seen last month the coming back of the Oromo Liberation Movement to Ethiopia. This was one of the armed groups which were fighting. Of course, it was based in Eritrea. We also need to remember that. And this will help, I would say, in my assumption, in transforming the political process in Ethiopia. So Ethiopia has already started taking meaningful steps. It doesn't mean these are enough. It doesn't mean these are sufficient, but there is at least a signal or a sign on the part of the new government in Ethiopia. We don't see this in Eritrea. These are my concerns. So my point is the national institutions, the institutions that support democratic accountability, the institutions that support transparency in both countries, they need to be nurtured. In cases where such institutions do not exist, they need to be re-established or established as soon as possible, because this ongoing peace process, it needs supporting institutions. It has to be institutionalized, basically. That's the core of the argument I'm trying to make here. So we don't see that on both sides on an equal footing. That's why I actually believe this peace process is happening in a relationship which can be described as asymmetrical. There is an imbalance of the essential requirements of democratic accountability in both countries, and I very much hope that this will be addressed by both governments sooner than later.
Okay, very interesting points you both made there. Now, I just want to ask about outside influences. Of course, you mentioned the African Union and bringing in other international institutions. But first of all, explain why the US, Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates were involved in this peace deal. What's in stake, the stake there, the interest for these three countries brokering peace between two African countries?
Now, I mean, it goes without saying that there is peace agreed between two countries, Ethiopia and Eritrea. But we need to understand very clearly that the impact of the peace between these two countries is going to resonate far beyond the two countries, encompassing the entire horns of Africa. Now, you know as well that terrorism is a very serious, challenge of this day and age. We do know the activities of Al-Shabaab among other terrorist organizations, that it has become a borderless phenomenon, going as far back to Europe, America, and the Arab countries. So it becomes everyone's business. So I mean, it is not rocket science indeed that America, Europe, and the rest of the civilized world has interest in this peace deal and are helping to facilitate it and to make it stick. I believe more should be done intergovernmentally to sustain this peace.
Okay, and your thoughts, Daniel, on this point?
What we know from the past few months is that yes, the governments of Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates are actually very much involved in this peace process. Both governments have invited the president of Eritrea and the prime minister of Ethiopia to really acknowledge their willingness to accept this new peace proposal, which was previously reported as being promoted behind the scenes by these two governments. So finally, since we have seen the official ceremony of awarding both leaders in that respect countries, that now we know there has been involvement, of course. I'm not sure if there has been any role of the United States of America behind the scenes, maybe yes. But let me explain why.
If you could very briefly, Daniel, because we're running out of time.
I will do it short. I will do it in 1 minute. The reason why the United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia are involved in this peace process is actually they are using the port of Assad, their military base, as a temporary or long-term military base for their military operations in Yemen. So it's important for them to have peace between Eritrea and Ethiopia in order for them to be able to use the facilities at the port of Assad. This is one of several factors, but in my understanding, this is the reason why they're actively involved in this process.
Okay, thank you. Well, we're going to have to leave it there. We were just getting to a very interesting part. Collins and Nweke, thank you very much. And also Daniel Mekonnen, both of you, thank you very much for joining us on The Newsmakers. And we wish peace for both Ethiopia and Eritrea. Thank you.